"You don't belong here." The words, cold and clipped, cut through the polished hush of sterling gems like a blade. Linda Hayes didn't shout them. She didn't need to. Her tone, laced with contempt and condescension, struck louder than volume ever could. The manager's posture stiffened as she planted herself in front of the display case, eyes narrowed at the man who had just stepped across the marble threshold. A black man, tall and composed, dressed not in tailored designer wear like the other customers, but in a dark turtleneck under a charcoal wool coat. Clean, professional, but not what Linda expected from someone walking into Beverly Hills' most exclusive jewelry boutique on a Friday morning. "We reserve our time for serious clientele," she added, her voice cool as the diamonds behind the glass. David Carter stood still, not moving toward the counter, not looking around in defense. His eyes remained on her, not with anger, but with calculation. A silence stretched between them, taut with expectation. One of the male customers turned away from a nearby necklace display just long enough to catch the standoff. Then came the smirk. Richard Powell, silver-haired and smug in his Italian suit, let out a low chuckle and leaned in slightly, as if this was the morning's entertainment. "Money talks," he said, tilting his head toward David, "but you don't look like you speak the language." With that, he slowly pulled a folded bill from his pocket, one crisp, $100 note after another, and fanned them out subtly, before sliding them toward Linda's register. "Let's not waste time. Wrap up the earrings I picked, and I'll add 500 if we don't have to be interrupted again." Customers laughed quietly. One woman whispered to her friend, both of them clutching their purses a little tighter. Linda didn't blink. "You heard the man," she said to David. "This isn't your kind of store, sir." And for a moment, that seemed to be the end of it. Another statistic, another moment of quiet prejudice. Another time someone had been told, without saying it outright, that they didn't belong because of how they looked. But David Carter didn't step back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even move toward the platinum chain he had come in to inspect. He only spoke 6 calm words. "You'll regret this entire morning. Before we dive into the story, have you ever been judged just by how you look?" David was, but he didn't stay silent. "Where are you watching from? Share your story in the comments. Back in the store." Linda folded her arms. "Don't waste my time with fake inquiries," she snapped. "We get people like you sometimes. You walk in, pretend you're shopping, and next thing we know, we've got reports of missing pieces. I'm not going through that again." David's jaw remained tight, unmoving. His wallet stayed in his pocket. His hands stayed open at his sides. It was Stephen Brooks, the store's middle-aged security supervisor, who stepped forward next. He didn't touch David, but his voice was just loud enough to make an impression. "He's trouble," he muttered, tapping the earpiece connected to Sterling's internal system. Then, louder, "We're going to need to monitor this one." That was when Richard raised his voice for everyone to hear. "Why don't you go back where you came from?" he said, loud and slow, as if he was offering a lesson to the entire room. "Clearly, Rodeo Drive isn't it?" The humiliation didn't ripple, it struck. Several heads turned. A younger couple near the entrance exchanged awkward glances. One older woman cleared her throat but didn't say anything. David's expression remained calm. "Keep going," he said softly. "Dig that hole a little deeper." Linda narrowed her eyes. "If you don't have proof of funds, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We don't take walk-ins lightly." "I didn't walk in lightly," David replied. "I walked in quietly, and you mistook silence for weakness." Richard chuckled again. "Out of your league, pal." Linda gestured toward the register. "Show me the money, or leave." David tilted his head slightly, not out of defiance, but out of control. "You're digging your own grave," he said, and with that, he pulled out a phone, not the latest iPhone, not a flashy designer model, just a simple device with a matte black finish. He held it low, thumb tapping quietly across the screen. 20 feet away, Emily, the youngest sales associate on shift, had frozen behind the engagement ring's display. Her lips parted slightly as she watched. She'd heard Linda make offhand remarks before. She'd ignored them, like most of the junior staff. But today, something felt different. This man wasn't yelling. He wasn't fighting. But he also wasn't backing down. And that scared Linda more than anything. In a control center 5 miles away, deep in the basement of Carter Industries' Los Angeles Security Division, a woman named Olivia Brooks leaned back from her monitor. She had just received a single word from David through an encrypted signal. Shadow. That was all it took. Inside Sterling Gems, the lights flickered, just slightly, barely noticeable to anyone not paying attention. Nathan Lee, the on-call IT specialist for Sterling's internal systems, noticed it immediately. He didn't know why, but something in the data feed was wrong. The registers were glitching. The payment system wouldn't connect. A quiet panic started to stir in the staff break room. "And Linda?" Linda kept going. "You think I care about your little threats?" she snapped, leaning forward across the counter. "I've been in this business for 30 years. I know how to spot a fake shopper a mile away." David looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, just barely, behind him. A boyish-looking intern named Ethan Clark, officially there just to observe the floor layout, pulled out his phone. He wasn't supposed to record anything, but something told him this moment might be important. David raised his phone again, pressed a single button, and recorded the next line that came out of Linda's mouth. "You people always think you can stroll in here and demand respect." Emily gasped, loudly. Stephen glanced sideways. Richard laughed again, but for the first time. Linda faltered, just a blink, just a half-step backward as she realized what she had said out loud. David tucked the phone back into his coat pocket. "And that," he said, "is the moment everything changed." He turned and began to walk toward the entrance, calm and unrushed, not escorted, not ejected, not defeated, in the Sterling security channel. Olivia's voice crackled into the staff frequency. "Protocol Shadow is active. Begin internal capture. All comms archived. All personnel logged." The store didn't know it yet. But the next 7 minutes would not just cost them a sale. They'd cost them everything. The hum of Sterling Gems' elegant ambiance cracked beneath invisible pressure. In the moments after David Carter exited the showroom floor, a strange electricity settled over the boutique. Linda Hayes still stood behind the counter, trying to mask her unease behind pursed lips and a flinty stare, but her confidence was thinning. She glanced at Stephen Brooks, who was now standing with his hand resting a little too firmly on the holster of his radio. "Something's wrong," she muttered under her breath. "He didn't flinch. He should have caused a scene." But David hadn't come to make noise. He'd come to bring down the entire facade. Then, without warning, the in-store systems began to stutter. The digital payment interface blinked twice, then went black. The music stopped mid-piano note. The surveillance monitors in the back room sputtered into static. Nathan Lee, who had just returned from his lunch break, rushed back into the control office and began running diagnostics. His screen showed a looping error with Sterling's internal server timestamps. They were being pulled backward, then fast-forwarded. Files were syncing to cloud drives that weren't even listed in Sterling's infrastructure. Nathan's brow furrowed. "This isn't random." Out front, Linda's face turned a shade paler as the card terminal rebooted itself. She tapped the display. "We have systems issues," she announced stiffly. Loud enough for customers to hear, but not quite loud enough to seem like she had lost control. Stephen stepped closer and tapped into his earpiece. "Lock the register access. That man's still in the system. I don't care how. We need to shut it down. He's a threat," Stephen barked, louder this time. "Lock it down." Customers began shifting uncomfortably. Richard Powell, still waiting for his $4,000 transaction to process, looked over his shoulder and sneered. "You're telling me that guy broke the system? Figures. The moment he walks in, this place turns into a flea market." Linda forced a laugh. "Exactly. Nothing but drama when you open the door too wide." Emily, who had been silently organizing the Sapphire case, finally spoke up. "That's not fair," she said, barely above a whisper. "He didn't do anything. He was polite." Linda snapped around. "That man walked in here looking for trouble." Emily didn't step back. "He walked in here with more class than any of us are showing right now." Several heads turned. One woman nearby clutched her pearls and turned toward the exit. Another man began recording on his phone. Tension thickened the air like fog. "Someone escort her to the back." Stephen growled. "And keep an eye on the girl, too. She's getting emotional." David was already steps away from the building, moving slowly past the sidewalk windows, eyes locked ahead. He didn't need to turn around to feel the chaos unfolding. He could hear it. Rising voices, the sudden loss of control. But his voice remained silent. Back inside. Linda leaned toward the touchscreen again and hissed. "Get him off our network! Scrub the session! I don't care if you have to reset the server!" In the IT room, Nathan's pulse quickened. "It's not that simple," he said into the internal channel. "There's a mirrored link connecting our floor cams to a remote system. I didn't install it. It's logging everything." Michael Vaughn, Sterling's chief operating officer, patched into the call from corporate HQ across town. His voice came through low and urgent. "Whatever's happening on that floor, shut it down. We don't need another viral moment. Do not let him near any system interface." Stephen, now red-faced, scanned the boutique for David, unaware he'd already walked out. "Don't let him back in." "You mean the guy who didn't raise his voice once?" Emily muttered. "You mean the man who walked away after being insulted for 20 minutes? Don't test me, kid," Stephen warned. "You're new here." Near the watch display, Richard laughed again, his voice sharper now, turning toward the security feed that had frozen on David's face just before he walked out. "Looks like nobody wants you. Pal!" he barked at the static image. "Run along. Take your little tantrum somewhere else." Stephen turned to Linda. "Call security. Full lock. I want him flagged. Suspicious." David didn't break stride outside, but as he reached the side of the building, his phone buzzed twice. Olivia Brooks, his chief of security, had just uploaded internal access from Sterling's system. The folder was labeled Phase 2, Inside. Nathan watched the internal logs shift in real time. One file folder titled Employee Conduct, HR Inquiries was being uploaded to an unknown directory marked CI Lay Core. The system wasn't hacked. It was being accessed legally. Via executive-level credentials Nathan had never seen before. And then Ethan Clark made his move. The intern, officially shadowing the merchandising team, had just overheard Stephen's last 3 messages. His eyes widened when he spotted the blinking drive light beneath the manager's desk. Linda had activated an emergency wipe. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out his own flash drive, and slipped into the hallway near the locked HR terminal. His hands trembled, but he moved quickly. He wasn't just saving files, he was protecting the truth. Because what he had heard in the last 10 minutes wasn't just bad customer service. It wasn't even just racism. It was targeted systemic discrimination, validated and encouraged through back-channel executive chats. And now, someone was cleaning house, someone with power, back at Carter Industries HQ. Olivia opened the internal feed as David's voice rang into her headset. "They flagged me." "Understood," she said, activating screen share, then across the Sterling staff terminals. A message blinked in the top right corner. Shadow protocol acknowledged. Observation phase complete. Begin flagged log review. The staff never saw it, but Nathan did, and so did Emily. And that was when the revolt quietly began. Emily crossed the floor again, this time standing between Linda and the register. "You know what?" she said clearly, looking Linda straight in the eye. "If he was anyone else, if he was dressed like Richard or came in with a bodyguard, you wouldn't have said a word. But because he looked like me, you felt bold." Linda's face flushed red. "Get back to the stockroom." "I'd rather walk out," Emily replied. "But not before I say this. You're on the wrong side of history." Several customers had stopped browsing. One began filming. The atmosphere turned thick, the energy no longer confusion, but reckoning. In the building's private network, Olivia sent one final message to Nathan's console. "Begin Phase 3. Reveal purchase intent." Within seconds, Sterling's internal system pinged. A notification surfaced. Incoming ownership inquiry. Carter Industries Legal Counsel. Subject, acquisition of Sterling Gems Division. Client, D. Carter. Date. Stamp, effective today. 9 Brosse M. Nathan gasped. Ethan stared at the file. Emily's eyes widened. Linda froze. And Stephen, still barking orders to shut everything down, was the last to realize that the man he had called a threat was not just a shopper, he was their future boss. And he had just flipped the switch. Sterling's walls were still standing, but the floor beneath them had begun to crack, and no one could stop what came next. The marble floor of Sterling Gems never felt so fragile. By the time David Carter reached the corner of the block, a CNN field crew had arrived across the street. They hadn't come for him, at least, not intentionally. A tip about disruption at a luxury retailer involving racial profiling had filtered through local police scanners and landed in the hands of a producer with instincts for viral tension. Now the camera was rolling, trained on the boutique's glittering facade, just as chaos rippled through its glossy calm. Inside, Linda Hayes was losing control. She slammed her hand against the malfunctioning payment terminal for the 4th time, sweat forming under her perfectly styled blonde bob. "Why is this still happening?" she hissed to Stephen Brooks, who was pacing near the entrance, barking conflicting orders into his headset. "He's a liability!" Stephen shouted toward the internal security team. "Get him out of the system! Lock every credential he might have touched!" "He didn't touch anything," Emily shot back. Standing firm by the sapphire display, her tone was clear, defiant. "You flagged him for nothing. Now you're unraveling." "Don't you start," Stephen warned. "You're this close to a write-up." Michael Vaughn's voice buzzed in from the corporate line, this time with a metallic edge. "Stephen, we can't have this go public. Remove him. I don't care how. Make it go away." "He's not even in the building," Emily said. Stephen turned to the remaining security guards. "If he comes back in, escort him out. Now!" Just then, the glass doors whooshed open. David Carter stepped back inside Sterling Gems. Not with a crowd, not with lawyers, not with threats. With silence. Every conversation paused. Linda's breath caught in her throat. Stephen moved first, charging forward. "You're finished here," he growled, thrusting a hand toward David's chest. "This store is private property. You're done." Before Stephen could make contact, David slowly raised his hand, not to block, but to reach into his coat. He pulled out a plain black folder. It was unmarked, save for a silver Carter Industries insignia etched into the corner. "You don't want to do this," David said quietly. "Not when you're already standing on a fault line." "Richard Powell," standing by the counter with the arrogant air of someone who had always been served first. Barked a laugh. "You're still here? I thought you'd have learned your place by now. Go yell about injustice somewhere else. Pal." Stephen's eyes locked on the folder. "What is that?" But before David could answer, Linda stepped out from behind the counter, her mouth curling into a smirk. "You're not welcome here," she said, "and just to make it official." She tapped the screen behind the counter. David's name appeared in red text. Under a flashing header, "Blacklisted customer, do not serve." "Consider this your permanent ban," Linda said, pleased with herself. "You'll never shop here again." Another round of laughter from Richard. "Good riddance," he said, pulling out his phone and pretending to film David's retreat. "Guess we're safe from the riffraff now." But David didn't move. He remained calm. "So that's your final word?" "Oh yes," Linda said with absolute certainty. David nodded once, then spoke 3 words into his phone. "Phase 4. Upload." In an instant, Sterling's internal system lit up like a struck nerve. At first, only Nathan noticed. His screen stuttered, then surged forward as several protected folders decrypted themselves in real time. The HR reports, the system logs, the bonus pay histories. Everything hidden behind Sterling's internal vault was spilling out, and at the top of it all was a document labeled Confidential, Executive Communications, Richard Powell Comp Package, Store Manager Bonus Adjustment, linked to customer demographics. Ethan Clark, now seated behind the backup terminal, caught the subject line first. His heart slammed against his chest. "Oh my God," he whispered. It was there in black and white. Bonus schedules tied to how certain customers were handled. A tiered system that quietly penalized staff for giving attention to non-core clientele. A phrase Ethan now understood as code for racial profiling. The document wasn't just an internal policy. It was corporate fraud. Richard kept laughing, until he noticed 3 customers walking out the front door in silence. Another one was whispering to her husband. Emily turned slowly toward Linda. "You still think he's just a man with no money?" Linda opened her mouth to speak. She never got the chance. CNN's crew entered. "Ma'am," the field reporter said, eyes wide with unfolding opportunity. "Do you want to comment on reports that your store discriminated against a customer who turned out to be your owner?" Linda blinked. "Owner?" Outside, Olivia Brooks stood at the far end of the sidewalk in a black blazer and earpiece. Arms folded, she nodded once to David, who gently placed the folder on the glass counter. "You might want to read the last page," he told Linda. She flipped it open with trembling fingers. Effective. January 1st. Carter Industries hereby assumes controlling interest in Sterling Gems retail division. The signature at the bottom was unmistakable. David A. Carter, CEO, Carter Industries. Linda staggered back. Stephen looked like someone had punched the air from his lungs. Michael Vaughn's voice screamed through the store speaker system. Someone had patched his audio in. "Cut the feed! Get me off that damn speaker!" But it was too late. Emily looked to David. "They're going to deny everything. I don't need their confession," David replied. "I brought receipts." From the control office, Nathan hit send on a zip file. The internal fraud memo, linking Sterling's demographic-based bonuses, Richard's corrupt financial perks, and Linda's performance incentives, was now live on an investor watchdog server, already picked up by financial news trackers. The fallout began immediately. Nathan's phone buzzed with a Reuters alert. Breaking, Sterling Gems. Faces allegations of racial profiling and financial misconduct following executive leak. Ethan watched the alert spread from phone to phone. Customers were reading it while standing in the store. Richard slowly backed away from the camera crew. Linda's knees buckled. Stephen looked to the door, as if escape might be possible, but David didn't yell. He didn't smirk. He didn't celebrate. He simply turned to the camera and said, "This company was built on exclusion, powered by deceit, and masked with luxury. That ends today." And as he exited for the second and final time, the Sterling Gems sign above the door began to flicker, because the lights might have still been on, but the foundation was already gone. At precisely 11:12 a.m., just 20 minutes after David Carter left the Sterling Gems boutique for good. The first tremor struck the company's headquarters in Century City. It began with a series of automated alerts flooding the inboxes of Sterling's top executives. Red-flagged system errors, unauthorized document transfers, and a sudden, unexplained spike in external server activity. Then came the media storm. CNN had aired the footage in near real time, a composed black man calmly placing a legal folder on the counter of a luxury jewelry store moments after being insulted and ejected, then revealing, on camera, that he was the new controlling owner. Beneath the clip ran a brutal headline: "Sterling Gems owner denied service due to race. Fires manager on spot." At corporate HQ, chaos erupted. Michael Vaughn, Sterling's 60-year-old COO, stood in the center of the executive floor's glass-walled boardroom, his phone glued to his ear while his assistant fumbled with printouts of the investor dashboard. "How bad is it?" Michael demanded. His voice was tight, shaky. He hadn't yet processed the full scope of what had happened inside the Rodeo Drive store. He only knew there was a video, and it was already spreading like wildfire. "Get me the publicist. No, not the intern. Jacqueline, I want senior crisis control. And tell the board we need an emergency session, now." Downstairs in the investor relations department, panic had already set in. The leaked internal memo, the one tying customer race to manager bonuses, had gone live on a financial whistleblower blog, and the link had since been picked up by the Reuters breaking news wire. Ethan Clark, the Carter Industries intern, had tagged it with a unique identifier that made its authenticity traceable and impossible to spin. Sterling couldn't disown the document without admitting it existed, and admitting it meant disaster. At the same moment, shareholders logged into the company's investor portal and were greeted with something they never expected: a detailed report titled "Sterling Gems Conduct Irregularities and Pending Audit Considerations." It had been uploaded directly into the internal compliance folder by someone with top-tier access credentials. Michael knew instantly what had happened. "He had help," he muttered, eyes scanning the glass as if David might suddenly materialize on the other side of the window. "He had people on the inside." A financial officer burst into the room. "Sales are tanking. We've had over 600 canceled orders in the last 30 minutes. Customers are demanding refunds." Michael waved a hand in frustration. "Calm them down! Tell them it's a misunderstanding." But nothing about the optics looked like a misunderstanding, because out in the world, people weren't just outraged by what happened in the store. They were shocked by the cold, corporate precision of what followed. The video of David's removal had been contrasted with the moment of his return, the elegance of his reveal, and the expression on Linda's face when she read the signature on that document. Back at headquarters, Stephen Brooks, having been summoned directly from Rodeo Drive, entered the boardroom flanked by two junior HR representatives. His face was pale, slick with sweat. He looked less like a security supervisor and more like a man who had witnessed an execution. "It was him," Stephen stammered. "He never raised his voice, never even argued. He let Linda humiliate him, and then he just flipped everything." Michael rounded on him. "Why didn't you recognize him? His face is in every internal security memo from Carter Industries." Stephen blinked. "Sir, no one told us Carter was buying us. We had no idea." "You should have known," Michael barked. "Now look what you've done." That was when the boardroom's overhead screen flickered to life, automatically syncing with the internal shareholder network. Olivia Brooks appeared on the feed, standing in a Carter Industries command center lined with digital screens and live metrics. "Good afternoon," Olivia said, her voice smooth and clipped. "We are initiating an emergency shareholder meeting on behalf of Mr. David Carter, controlling investor of Carter Industries and majority stakeholder in Sterling Gems." Michael's face turned to stone. "Cut the feed. We have verified authentication." Olivia continued. "And we have reason to believe that Sterling's internal leadership engaged in systemic discrimination, illegal incentivization structures, and data manipulation to suppress financial disclosures." The boardroom fell silent. Richard Powell, patched into the meeting from his estate in Bel Air, finally spoke. "You can't be serious. That man walked into a store and got offended. Now you're letting him dismantle the company?" Olivia's gaze remained level. "Mr. Powell, the memo outlining your exclusive compensation package tied to customer race has already been reviewed by the Securities and Exchange Commission. We suggest you retain counsel." Michael turned to his legal team, but it was already too late. The feed had shifted to a real-time chart showing Sterling Gems' share value plummeting. It had dropped 12% in 19 minutes, another 8% in the last 3. Hedge fund bots had already initiated auto sells. The company was bleeding, and worse. David hadn't even stepped back into the building. He didn't need to. From the 62nd floor of Carter Industries Tower, David stood in a quiet room with full glass windows overlooking downtown Los Angeles. In his hand was a remote call device patched into Olivia's headset. "Send it," he said simply. On the other end, Olivia executed the final maneuver. A data packet titled M. Vaughn Fraud Audit PDF was released to Sterling's internal board and CC'd to its 3 largest investors. The file contained whistleblower accounts, flagged wire transfers, and proof of executive awareness of Linda's in-store practices. Inside the boardroom, someone gasped. Another investor stood up and walked out. Michael reached for the control panel, his fingers trembling. But the feed ended before he could touch it. Then came the final blow. Olivia's voice rang one last time into the silence. "As of noon today, Carter Industries will proceed with internal restructuring of Sterling Gems, effective immediately. Executive-level changes are non-negotiable. Details to follow in writing." Michael stared at the blank screen, stunned. Sterling wasn't just in crisis. It was burning. And the fire had started the moment they told David Carter he didn't belong. Michael Vaughn stood alone at the head of the boardroom table. The leather seats, once filled with confident executives, now eerily vacant. The last hour had drained the room of its usual authority, leaving only silence, shame, and the soft hum of a failing HVAC system. Across from him, Stephen Brooks adjusted his collar with shaking fingers. He'd seen war zones calmer than this. Next to him, Linda Hayes looked as if she'd aged 10 years. Her arms were crossed tightly, but her lips wouldn't stop moving, muttering excuses, deflections, fragments of a defense that was crumbling by the second. The elevator chimed. David Carter entered without ceremony. No entourage, no lawyers, no need. He moved with deliberate calm, the quiet kind of power that filled a room before anyone had a chance to speak. He walked to the end of the table, placed a single folder down before Michael Vaughn, and waited. No one told him to sit. He didn't ask to. "I assume," David said evenly, "you've all had a chance to review the fraud disclosures?" Michael opened his mouth, but no sound came out. It was Stephen who filled the silence, more out of panic than loyalty. "Listen, we didn't know who you were," he blurted. "You came into the store without warning, without an escort. You don't need to know someone's name," David said coldly. To treat them with basic human dignity. Linda leaned forward, forcing a tremble from her voice to sound like poise. Mr. Carter, I didn't mean for anything to appear discriminatory. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. David cut his gaze toward her slowly. You said I didn't belong. You instructed your staff to blacklist me. You ignored your associate when she questioned your bias. You even looked a customer in the eye and allowed him to say, "Go back where you came from," without a word of correction. Linda paled. But the most dangerous thing you did, David continued, was believe your actions would go unseen, that no one would ever hold you accountable. He turned back toward Michael. That belief ends today. Michael straightened his blazer. We can salvage this, he said, with a lawyer's rhythm and a gambler's desperation. There's a path forward. We'll issue a formal apology, place Linda on probation, suspend Stephen. David raised a hand, and just like that, Michael fell silent. This isn't about damage control, David said. This is about accountability, real, lasting reform, and that starts with consequences. He turned to Stephen first. You enabled everything that happened on that floor. You reinforced the bias. You labeled me a threat. You instructed your team to lie about me accessing the system. I was following protocol. Stephen tried. No, David interrupted. You were following prejudice. Then he looked at Michael. Suspend him. Effective immediately. Michael hesitated. I'm not sure that's... Do it, David said. Or I walk. There was no threat in his voice, just a simple certainty that if he left, the rest of the company would collapse before the end of the week. Michael turned to Stephen, his jaw clenched. You're suspended. Clean out your office. Stephen didn't argue. He stood, red-faced and wordless, and walked out. David then looked directly at Linda. The air in the room dropped. You called security on me in my own store, he said quietly. You humiliated me publicly. You reinforced a policy that rewarded racial profiling. And then, when you realized your mistake, you doubled down and lied. Please, Linda said, voice cracking. I've been with Sterling for 31 years. This place is my life. And you made it a nightmare for people like me to walk into, David said, his tone razor sharp. You don't get to use tenure as a shield, not when your legacy is built on exclusion. He looked to Michael. Terminate her. Michael didn't move. David leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to sound deadly. Do it now. Michael exhaled slowly, picked up the intercom, and pressed a button. HR? This is Vaughn. Terminate Linda Hayes' employment. Effective immediately. Escort her from the building after she collects her things. Linda gasped as if she'd been struck. You're making a mistake, she said, rising from her chair. You can't do this to me. I already did, David replied. She stood for a beat too long, staring at David's face as if trying to find mercy. There was none. Two security personnel entered the room and approached quietly. Without another word, Linda gathered her purse, avoided every eye in the room, and walked out. Michael sat down heavily, his hands flat on the table. There's more fallout coming. The investors are livid. The media. They'll calm down once they see change, David said. Real change. Michael's eyes narrowed. And what gives you the authority to dictate all this? You're an investor. Yes, but you don't control everything. David reached into his inner coat pocket and slid one last document across the table. Michael scanned it, his hands trembling. Carter Industries Regulatory Affairs Agreement, filed with the Department of Justice and California State Attorney General's Office. Clause 14, oversight triggers upon verified discrimination or financial malfeasance. At the bottom was a gold-stamped seal and a signature, David A. Carter, CEO and founder, Carter Industries. David's voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of thunder. I built Carter Industries after a patent I created at 19 was stolen and buried. I've watched the boardrooms that dismissed me, the stores that followed me, the systems that erased me. I swore I'd never let injustice go unchallenged again. So when I invested in Sterling, I didn't just write a check, I wrote a new rule book. Michael's face turned ashen. I now control the operational majority of this company, David said. And your time manipulating it is over. He stood. I'll return in 24 hours. By then, I want full access to the audit logs, a list of terminated bonus structures, and resignations from anyone complicit in this policy. Michael tried to speak, but no words came. David turned toward the door. Tell your staff, he said without looking back. Sterling's era is over. And with that, the man they'd once dismissed as an unqualified shopper walked out not just as their boss, but as the architect of their collapse. By Tukak Pa-M, the Sterling Gems name no longer gleamed with the shine it once held. Headlines were no longer speculative. They were damning. Sterling Gems hit with discrimination allegations and internal fraud leak, blared across the top of the CNN business homepage. Bloomberg had already started a running segment on the scandal. Analysts discussing the implications for luxury retail and the future of shareholder governance, but inside Sterling's Century City headquarters, the real storm had broken. The internal audit team. Until now, a ceremonial group tucked away in a quiet corner of the finance wing had been given full clearance by David Carter's direct order. What they uncovered in the first 90 minutes sent shockwaves through every floor. Financial records tied to off-book compensation schemes, ghost bonuses routed through shell entities, and an entire loyalty adjustment program that gave store managers, like Linda Hayes, monetary incentives for prioritizing preferred demographics. The language wasn't explicit, but it was coded well enough to meet every legal threshold for discrimination. Worse still, a parallel audit team. This one deployed quietly through Carter Industries' internal compliance division, had begun backtracking wire transfers that had gone to third-party consultants. One of those entities, it turned out, was owned by a family member of Richard Powell. Another was linked to a marketing contractor who had once sat on the Sterling board. The pieces were snapping into place not like a puzzle, but like a crime scene blueprint. Sterling's flagship Rodeo Drive store had gone dark. The location had been closed for inventory maintenance. But the truth was clear. Sales had collapsed. Every appointment that afternoon had been canceled. Emails were flooding in from longtime clients, some confused, others angry, all demanding answers. The internal staff hotline had received over 1,200 calls by 3:15 p.m., most from employees afraid they'd be implicated by proximity alone. Michael Vaughn had locked his office door. No press statement had been released. No apologies had been made. The collapse was no longer theoretical. It was in motion. And far above the fray, in a sky-lit conference room atop the Carter Industries tower, David Carter prepared to do something even his closest allies hadn't expected. He pivoted to build. Emily has agreed to come aboard, Olivia Brooks announced as she entered the room with a fresh stack of updates. She's in HR orientation now. She'll help develop the new frontline ethics protocol for Carter Gems. Good, David replied without turning. He was staring out the massive windows at the horizon beyond Los Angeles. She's the kind of voice the industry tried to silence. Let's make sure that doesn't happen again. He turned slowly as Nathan Lee joined them, still shaken but steady. I reviewed the source code from their loyalty ranking system, Nathan said. It was designed to bury unfavorable shopper profiles without any formal blacklist. Just silent redirection. That's why the customer service algorithms kept failing. David nodded. Document it. Turn it into a case study. Every luxury retail partner in our network needs to see how quiet discrimination works. Already done, Nathan said. I've even packaged a training simulation based on the Sterling floor footage. It's uncomfortable to watch. Good, David said again. Real change should be uncomfortable. Across the room, a whiteboard listed names: terminated, suspended, under review. Linda Hayes, Stephen Brooks, Michael Vaughn, Richard Powell. Half of Sterling's executive suite had either been removed or placed on administrative leave pending federal investigation. The other half had been stripped of operational authority until the Department of Justice finished its own audit. David crossed to the board and drew a thick line under the last name. We launch Carter Gems next quarter, he said. Clean branding, transparent hiring, mandatory equity training, and partnerships with independent accountability groups. Olivia smiled slightly. The market's ready for it. They're not just ready, David replied. They're starving for it. He paused, then tapped on the name Richard Powell. And what about the Powell Foundation sponsorship? Terminated, Olivia said. They tried to negotiate with a donation. We declined. David gave the faintest nod. We don't take hush money. He turned back toward the window, watching the sun begin to dip westward. The city below was still buzzing. Endless cars, flashing headlines, investors dialing into emergency calls. But he wasn't looking at the noise. He was looking beyond it. Because while Sterling's walls were crumbling, Carter Gems was already taking shape. And this time, the foundation wouldn't be built on exclusion or pretense. It would be built on truth. The press conference was held on a warm spring morning beneath a white canopy just outside the soon-to-open Carter Gems flagship store, formerly Sterling Gems, still located on Rodeo Drive, but transformed inside and out. The old gold and onyx signage had been replaced with clean, brushed platinum lettering, and the entryway, once guarded with silent judgment, now welcomed visitors with light, glass, and openness. The air buzzed not just with media crews and business columnists, but with something rarer: anticipation. David Carter stepped up to the podium in a slate-gray suit, no tie, collar open. He didn't need adornment to command the crowd. Around him stood members of his new executive team: Emily, now Director of Equity and Training; Nathan, leading Systems Transparency; Olivia Brooks as Chief of Security and Compliance. Behind them, inside the building, dozens of young associates, diverse in every sense, watched from the showroom floor, ready to usher in something bigger than retail, ready to usher in a revolution. But first came the consequences. Across town, Linda Hayes packed the last of her things into a cardboard box. Her exit interview had been mercifully brief. The final judgment, however, was swift and clear. She was permanently barred from any Carter-owned property, and under civil review for her role in discriminatory compensation practices. Her attempt to quietly pivot to another luxury brand was already unraveling. Every reference request was met with an official statement. Ms. Hayes's conduct is under active investigation. Stephen Brooks didn't fare better. His security license was revoked after investigators found that he manipulated internal surveillance footage to cover up multiple bias complaints. His name became a case study in every reform seminar David's team would later teach. And Michael Vaughn, once a towering figure in corporate management, was now the subject of a joint audit between the DOJ and California's Financial Crimes Task Force. He had resigned, but resignation wasn't immunity, nor was silence. As for Richard Powell, the once entitled patron whose jeers fueled the public unraveling, he lost more than reputation. Upon exposure of his private kickbacks and closed-door bonus agreements, his company's stock took a nosedive. Clients withdrew in droves. The Powell Foundation, once celebrated in certain elite circles, was placed on indefinite freeze. No one cheered his downfall, but few mourned it. David didn't name them directly at the press conference. He didn't need to. Their absence spoke louder than any public condemnation. Instead, he focused on what came next. Carter Gems, he began, his voice steady and clear, is not just a new brand, it's a commitment to transparency, to respect, to rebuilding not only how we sell beauty, but how we see it. For decades, luxury has spoken in whispers and coded language. We are here to speak plainly. He paused. To every person who's ever been followed through a store, ignored at the counter, judged by your accent, your skin, your shoes, we see you, we value you, and we've built this place for you. Applause broke out. Real applause. Not the polite kind reserved for ribbon cuttings, but something grounded, grateful. Every employee at Carter Gems, he continued, will receive mandatory equity training. Every executive bonus is now tied to inclusion metrics, not sales quotas. Our hiring panels are diversified, our customer profiles anonymized, and every single transaction is logged and reviewable by our internal ethics board. He looked directly into the camera lens. We are not perfect, but we are accountable. And then came the twist no one expected. David held up a second sheet of paper, one that hadn't been on the press release. This morning, a competing luxury retailer, one that once dismissed the idea of reform, reached out. They want access to our training modules. They want to replicate our transparency systems. He let the weight of that settle over the crowd. That, he said, is how change spreads. Later that day, across social media and in boardrooms around the country, companies that had once watched Sterling's collapse with smug detachment began reevaluating their internal systems. Some quietly, others publicly, because the truth was unavoidable now. This wasn't a one-off scandal. It was a new standard. As the press conference concluded and the ribbon was cut, customers streamed into Carter Gems. Some were curious, others were excited. A few just wanted to see what reform looked like in person. But all of them, every last one, were greeted with eye contact, respect, and welcome. Inside the store, Emily placed the first sale, a simple sapphire bracelet for a woman who had never stepped foot on Rodeo Drive before. Feels different in here, the customer said softly. It is, Emily replied, smiling. Outside, David walked down the steps, no fanfare behind him, just his team, just the work ahead. And as the sun dipped behind the Beverly Hills skyline, one message glowed brighter than any jewel in the window. Luxury means nothing without dignity, and dignity begins at the door.